Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. I am bringing you another indie comic review. Today we are looking at Kamen America Volume 5. Now, if you've watched this channel for a while, you know I usually show up on screen with the actual book in hand so that we can talk about it. But when I backed this Kickstarter, I made a mistake in the tier I backed, and I didn't back a tier that came with a physical book. That's okay, I will order one off of the Iconic Comics website later, and I will probably show that off when I review whatever the next Iconic offering from Mark and Tim is. Instead, we're going to go over a few images from the PDF files to give you a taste of what the comic is like. If you want to order a physical item, I can assure you Iconic Comics books have come in a very high quality in the past, and I don't expect that's going to be any different this time. Their hardcovers are very good. Their soft covers are nice, but not really that sturdy. I really recommend trying to pick up one of the hardcover omnibus versions, or if you can find them, hardcovers of everything individually. They all look very nice. They all have very covers. The paper stock is great quality, and Iconic hasn't changed printers, so I'm sure it's going to be good. At this point, they put out more than 10 books. I think we can make pretty safe bets on the quality of the physical item you're going to get. One really cool thing this Kickstarter came with that you can't get elsewhere is a 3D print file for a Kamen America statue. This is really pretty sweet. I have some friends who have 3D printers. I'm going to ask them to run a copy of this and have a look at it to see how it comes out. All in all, this is some really pretty cool stuff, but it's not the core of the Kickstarter. Obviously, that is the Kamen America story itself. Volume 5 is the start of a new saga and a jumping-on point for fresh readers. As such, I think it's worthwhile to take a moment to recap the previous saga. And from this point forward, there are going to be some small spoilers, plus one major spoiler. So if you haven't read the previous editions of Kamen America, what I would recommend doing is going back and watching one of my reviews of an earlier volume in the series to decide whether you want to start there. But if you've already read that and you're wondering whether you should jump in on the new saga now, or wait until their next omnibus comes out, well, this review is probably going to be a little more your speed. Of course, if you don't mind spoilers, and I know I really don't, you can, of course, watch this and get an idea of what Kamen America is and what the franchise is going to look like going forward, because I think there are some serious clues in this volume that will tell you what you're going to get over the next couple of years. So to recap, Carly Vanders is a fashion designer from Oscar, Indiana. She develops superpowers when a comet falls on her and irradiates her body with Chimeratron radiation. I hope I said that right. And Carly gets electrical powers. She can use them for a few hours a day. The exact time limit was originally 3 hours. I believe that has been lengthening over time as she gets more and more used to them, although I'd have to go back and check on that. And she's assembled a team of 3 other girls into the Kamen Corps. 2 of them have superpowers from the same source as Carly, and the third one is an expert gadget user who has a suit of power armor that is assembled from the pieces of the meteorite they were hit by, which actually turns out to have been a satellite. In addition to Carly's electrical powers, Misha has fire powers, Kimmy has water powers, and the main villain of the previous saga was the 4th person who was irradiated by this comet, who has earth powers, because of course you are going to have the 4 classic Greek elements represented in your superpowers, or people are going to ask questions. Finally, Sylvia is the gadget user, and she is kind of Carly's rival, at least for the first part of the story. They managed to make up in Volume 3, and so far they've had a lot of interesting adventures. In addition to making good with an old rival, Vicky has squared off against a really sleazy promoter by the name of Lansky, a group of terrorists using enhanced animals, known as Cryptic, and the aforementioned Earth villain, Vermilion Masquerade. This last villain, one of Carly's oldest friends, Vicky, and the reveal of this betrayal and the fact that Carly did not notice a very close friend slipping into such a dark place has undermined her confidence and her sense of her place in the world. While Carly has gone from being a literal no-name to a fairly well-known fashionista, and, of course, a well-regarded superhero, Carly feels kind of like she's lost track of the people she knows and how they are relating to each other. The fact that her first superpowered friend, Misha, has kind of stolen a march on her with the boy she's interested in, reinforced that notion in her mind, and Carly is actually starting out on a bit of a down note right now. So now that we're all on the same note, how is the story and art of Kamen America Volume 5? Well, let's start with the art. First and foremost, the thing that stood out to me the most was that the coloring of this book has gone from more bright, solid primary colors to a much more pastel aesthetic. Now, pastels have always been a part of the Kamen America aesthetic and a part of Timothy Lim's art style in general. There's nothing wrong with using them. However, they are much more prevalent in the coloring in this volume than in previous volumes, and the strong, bold colors of volumes 2 and 3 particularly, based on my quick flip-through of previous volumes, is really more suited for the kind of adventurous story that Kamen America tells. These pastels are a little more muted. They seem to bring down the tone of a lot of scenes that they're used in, which can be appropriate when they're used selectively, but particularly some of the action scenes can seem a little bit toned down with this coloration. And admittedly, part of this could be the fact that I am reading this on a computer monitor and not from a physical page. This does change the way colors land. But I think that specifically if you look at things like Misha's hair and the colors on some of the costumes the girls wear, you'll see that the colors seem a little more muted, and I don't think that's an improvement. Bold colors are part of the superhero aesthetic for a reason. It makes them really pop off the page, and it makes their poses and their action shots look really dynamic. On top of that, there's a lot of talk about posing between the characters in this book, which is very interesting because the characters themselves seem a little more wooden and a little less alive on the page than in previous versions. I don't know if Tim Lim was rushed working on this or if he was just aiming to do something different with his action scene composition in this series, but not all of the action shots are as dynamic and fun as previous action sequences have been in this series. Maybe Lim is just looking to branch out into different kinds of poses and angles and shots, which is fine. It is important to expand that repertoire, but his work in this installment seems a little shaky compared to previous volumes. On top of that, some of the character design for the new characters here seems a little uninspired. Now, on the one hand, clearly Lim and Pellegrini are having fun with the tropes of the Super Sentai genre. You have the foot soldiers, whose design is very uninspired deliberately, so that they can just sort of fade into the background. And then you have the Rangers themselves, who, quite deliberately, look like they come out of a low-budget tokusatsu thing. And I guess there's nothing wrong with that. I guess I was just hoping for more of the really creative and exotic-looking designs we get in things like Black Hops, or even some of Vermilion Masquerade's more exciting and weird-looking kaiju-type creatures. As a riff on Sentai and Tokusatsu, these are not bad designs. In fact, they are quite good and faithful to the genre. So I suppose in that respect, Lim's work is quite praiseworthy. I just don't find it very exciting. Let's talk about the story itself. Pellegrini is a pretty good writer. Kamen America Volume 4 felt very much like an instant classic, and it's hard to follow up something like that, especially because most good writers only have one or two classics in them. When following up the high point in a series, it is often wise not to reach for the same heights immediately. And clearly, Pellegrini did not in writing this volume. So how did he do overall? Well, he did pretty good. This is not a bad story by any stretch of the imagination, but it is my personal opinion that this really should have been 2 volumes. There are, roughly speaking, 3 different stories tied up in this book. And you're probably thinking, well, that's great. Perfect 3-act structure there, right? No. Personally, I think that the first 2 stories in this book would have been better served as 1 volume and the third story as another volume. The first story in Volume 5 reintroduces us to the whole cast, and I do mean the whole cast. For those not familiar, Carly herself is a spin-off from another book that Lim and Pellegrini did. And in that book, she was introduced as part of a different team, separate from the Common Core. And those characters are reintroduced in the beginning of this volume, along with Carly and her friends, and some of her allies from Black Hops, the other series that Lim and Pellegrini work on for Iconic Comics. So right away, we get a ton of characters thrown at us to remind us of who they are. And that's fine for people who are reading this from Volume 1. But it is kind of an intimidating place to start for somebody trying to jump into a series. All in all, I don't think that's bad. I just think a little more time spent on these characters would have been nice. With the exception of Ice Tosterone and Marmot Maiden, we don't see any of these characters again outside of their brief appearance at the beginning of the volume. It really feels like a bit of a throwaway. Cryptic and Commando G just show up for an opening action scene and then they're gone again. There is talk about this incident throughout the rest of the book, but giving this part of the story more time to breathe, more time to get in touch with these characters, and more time to see them interact with Carly would have made this feel more like an important moment in her life and less like a establishing action scene to get people back into the groove of things. Giving this story another 10 or 15 pages would have made me feel better about it overall. Same goes for the interpersonal elements in between this incident and the trip to Vegas. Specifically, the uncomfortable dynamic between Carly and Siggy. It's good to get reacquainted with the interpersonal dynamics of all the different girls at the beginning of a major story arc like this. That said, this love triangle business gives me a little bit of pause, for reasons that I will dig into a little later in this video. Suffice it to say right now, I think if we're going to lean heavily on this as part of the relationship dynamic we're exploring in this saga, there are some things that need to be done with it, and this would have been a good opportunity to work it in. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. We're also introduced to the Zenarangers. These are the Super Sentai team spoof, and they're introduced as kind of silly. They do the poses. They have a really long title, Super Phenomena Fighters Zenarangers. Obviously, they are poking fun at Saban and the Sentai genre and Tokusatsu in general. However, they are also legitimately a little concerning because they are backed by Nero Lansky, the sleazeball who originally catapulted Carly to fame and then worked against her in the original saga. He's not a good dude, and that makes everything that the Zenarangers do suspect. Allowing the question of how much on the up and up they are to linger over the audience for a full volume would have been an interesting and bold writing choice, but that's not what happens. More on that later. After our introductory matter is complete, Carly and Sylvia go to a fashion show in Vegas, and there they run into some hostile robots. These are the same kind of robots that the Zenarangers fought in Paris. They prove to be immune to Carly's electrical powers in spite of there being electrical devices, and Sylvia has to run back to the hotel, retrieve her armor, and help Carly defeat them. This story shows that the girls have made up their previous rivalry, and they are really working together as a team now. This is the strongest part of this opening set of two stories, and I think it pretty much stands on its own as a piece of character writing and as a piece of plot development. I think this works really well, and I don't have any real critiques for it. Again, I think everything from the beginning of the volume to here, about 35 pages of story, really would have done well as an entire self-contained 60-page story on its own, with some of the weaker parts that I've mentioned expanded to bone up on some of the things that I think could have used a little more exploring, and to get us a little more invested in the characters. After all of that comes a business trip to Japan to meet Kimiko's parents. They own an instant ramen company, and they are looking to sponsor the Common Core. However, they prove to be a much bigger company than Carly was expecting, and she becomes a little bit hesitant on getting sucked into another corporate entanglement by accepting financial backing from them. This story arc plays up a couple of things. First, Carly's new, much harder line insistence on avoiding things that could possibly compromise her principles. Second, and just as importantly, Kimiko's need to find her place and how she contributes to the team. She doesn't feel as useful or as important to Carly as some of her friends are, and Kimiko seems to have the greatest need for approval from others of anyone on the team, so this is hard for her. Carly wants to do right by her friends and her principles, and she has to work that out. And in the middle of all of this, the strange robots that have been attacking in Paris and Vegas show up in Japan and cause more trouble. The Kamen Corps fights them only to have them reinforced by one of the Zenorangers. It turns out that Lansky is up to his old tricks, using a bunch of throwaway enemies to build up his new superhero team. This is the reveal that I would have liked to wait a little bit longer to get. Lansky is a hype man and he's sleazy and unethical, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's been hired by unethical people. I think it would have been really interesting to see the Zenorangers try and present a front to the Kamen Corps that they are ethical people who have hired Lansky, as opposed to Lansky hiring them for unethical purposes. That's not the way the story went, and I can understand that maybe we're going for a completely different direction here, especially based on the reveal at the end of this book. But as it is, I think allowing the audience to stew on this question a little bit longer would have made this reveal a little more impactful. That said, the Kamen Corps does win out on this. Kimiko gets a great moment in the sun, and we end on a reveal of who is backing Lansky and a promise of something very interesting to happen in the future of the Kamen Corps. Lastly, the teaser at the end of the volume reveals that Carly's priest is a retired soul finder, and Father Crane from the Soul Finder series shows up with a bunch of files, hinting at some part of what is going to happen in the big crossover event later this year. All in all, I would rate this story as slightly above average. All in all, while I appreciate what they are trying to do with the characters and setting up storylines, this entire volume feels very rushed. It's trying to accomplish a great deal in a very short period of time, and I think that overall, it would have benefited from letting these stories breathe a little bit more, expand on the characters a little bit more, and generally not just shove us through from place to place constantly, but let us settle down and dig back into the normal status quo for the Kamen Corps, rather than shoving us into a new adventure at such a high speed. Obviously, many of the things in the first half of this book are setting up the threads of new adventures, and we are ready for that because we are ready to see what Carly and her friends do from this point forward. But we just came off one huge adventure with them, and a little bit of downtime would have been nice. We needed an X-Men playing baseball episode. Now, admittedly, you kind of get this if you follow the Webtoon series, which is quite lighthearted and shows us the Kamen Corps in their downtime a lot more. It has jokes, it has hijinks, it has Florida Girl, it has Nyanfield, it has Badger, it has all kinds of great stuff. But if you're just following the mainline comics, you don't get that downtime with the characters, and the absence of it is felt. Two notes on characters specifically. The first one relates to Sigmund, our little Siggy boy here. We've seen the love triangle between him, Carly, and Misha coming for about 2 volumes now, and this is the volume where we're really seriously beginning to play around with it. I like that Sigmund is not a wet blanket, he's not a pushover, he's not indecisive, he doesn't have any of the character traits that makes the center of most love triangles unbearable. The character dynamics between Sig and Carly and Sig and Misha do a really good job of explaining why he doesn't really seriously consider either of them romantic options per se. There's a comfort and familiarity with Carly that makes taking a step beyond that very difficult, and there's a working relationship with Misha that makes moving beyond that kind of awkward, especially since he's technically her boss, at least at the gun shop. However, at this point in the narrative, it is painfully obvious, not just to the audience, but to him, that there are 2 women that have set their caps for him. It's up to men to make the decision whether they are going to form a relationship with a woman or turn them down decisively. Yet, so far, Sigmund has not made any move in that direction with either of these ladies. If that dynamic continues for much longer, he's going to either look weak and indecisive in spite of all his characterization to the contrary, or he's going to look like a cad. Again, in spite of previous characterization to the contrary. This problem with his characterization could be sidestepped if the love triangle was kept in the background. But with it constantly being brought up as a point of tension between Misha and Carly, I don't think that's going to happen, and I would hate to see the series' only male lead devolve into a weak-willed harem protagonist. For now, that potential grim fate is only in Sigmund's future, and I really hope he avoids it. The second note pertains to Carly's dad. We get a flashback sequence at the beginning of this volume where we see a young Carly talking with her dad, much like we've seen in other volumes. These moments are a nice touch, but I just now noticed that Carly's dad seems to speak with a bit of a drawl. Now, Oscar, Indiana is not a real place, but it seems to be at least partly based on the real town of Churubusco. Perhaps it's supposed to be a small town nearby. Perhaps it is an actual stand-in for Busco itself. Either way, I've lived in northeast Indiana for most of my life. Churubusco is about a half-hour drive from here. Nobody from this part of the state talks like that. Now, yeah, you may get some people with a bit of a drawl down in southern Indiana, but unless her dad's supposed to be from somewhere foreign like Kentucky, you aren't going to get a lot of that kind of drawl in the average everyday speech of the people around here. You might get some nasal twang like you might expect from Yoopers or people from Minnesota, but a drawl is pretty rare. So I guess what I'm really trying to say is, who is this guy and where is he from? Last but not least, let's address the elephant in the room. Lim and Pellegrini have said that one of their goals with Kamen America is to reintroduce a kind of wholesome sexiness into American comics. The Waifu Association patch that came with one of the previous campaigns was perfect proof of that. They're doing pretty well so far. But they've made the battle for Best Girl, which is the opening phase of any waifu war, extremely difficult to call here. Not only did we get a shot of Misha in a ravishing evening dress as she prepares to go out on the town with Siggy, we got Sylvia on the runway in a dress and a swimsuit, and a shot of her passed out in her camisole after a hard day fighting evil. Asking us to pick Best Girl from among these adorable Type A personalities is just not fair. Shame on you two. Shame! Of course, if the girl next door is your flavor, Carly is there as well, and we have the adorkable Kimiko to round things out and meet everyone's tastes. So all in all, I think they're doing pretty well on that front. Kamen America 5 is a little bit of a mixed bag. If you're already invested in the series, this is a perfectly serviceable entry into it. It has everything you would hope for, and a lot of love for some characters who we haven't gotten to know very well yet. It also is the setup for what looks to be a very interesting storyline going forward. Unfortunately, it is rushed enough that it does not stand on its own very well. I can't really recommend this as a jumping on point, even though I think it was intended as such. If you're interested in the series, buy the omnibus of volumes 1 through 4 and read that. Then you'll be ready to move on to volume 5. All in all, this is a good book from a very talented pair of creators. However, if I could speak directly to Tim Lim and Mark Pellegrini for a moment, let me say this. You are quite skilled, you are quite talented, and you have an audience who's become very invested in the stories you tell. Draw confidence from that. We trust you enough to know that we are going to get our money's worth from stories you tell. So don't be afraid to take a little more time and unpack things a little more slowly. I know you probably have a roadmap for all of this stuff sketched out and sitting in front of you or tacked up on a thumbboard or pinned to your refrigerator, and that's all well and good. Don't be afraid to take a detour here or there and let your story breathe. Now, I know there are some authors out there with a lot of initials in their names who have taken too many detours and upset their audience. You certainly don't want to pass over that threshold, but moving too quickly can rob your audience of investment just as much as moving too slowly. It's my hope that you two can find a better balance point for this going forward. Anyway, if you have thoughts on Kamen America Volume 5, please feel free to share them in the comments down below. There's a like button and a subscribe button down there. You can use those as you see fit, and I will talk to you later.